launched Tax Justice Network, a small group of Jersey people came to my home and said it's time for us to start taking action against tax havens which are damaging our island and our island's future prospects. And that very quickly led to a situation where a group of us met in Florence, in Italy, in November 2002, and agreed to create a new network and make a global network. And by March, 24th of March 2003, we were ready to launch, hosted by Prem and Austin Mitchell MP at the Houses of Parliament. We had people from all over Europe at that event, and we launched with a very simple plan: to create a global network, to take action against tax havens, because tax havens are operating like a cancer through the system, destroying the global economy. And I think now, 10 years later, that is absolutely clear that that's precisely what they do. They are wealth extractors, not wealth creators. They extract wealth from other countries, and they damage development right the way across the world. They damage democracy right the way across the world. They create inequality. They create inefficiency. In fact, they're totally harmful. And the quicker we get rid of the tax havens, the quicker the world will recover from the current crisis, and the quicker Jersey will be able to move to the next stage. Prem's outlined the forces at play. I just want to talk about one of my personal experiences. In 2003, I went for the first time to the annual session of the United Nations Committee of Experts on Tax Matters, International Cooperation on Tax Matters. At that time, Tax Justice Network was the first organisation representing civil society to ever attend this event, this annual event. And at the time it was clear that the United States and its ally, United Kingdom, was dominating the affairs and was shaping the rules very much to its own interests because they were politically dominant. When I went last year, and I've been every single year for the last 10 years, the United States is scarcely present. The United Kingdom, totally isolated. Our negotiator there is the most useless and the most arrogant person in the room. But no one is interested in the United Kingdom's position at all. We have no influence there whatsoever. China is surrounded by all the African states and the Latin American states. Brazil, they're listened to. India is listened to. And the reason is, as Prem explained, for the last 100 years, we, that is, the Western countries of Europe and North America, have shaped the rules to what we saw as our interests, which was the interests of our multinational companies. The rules were corrupt from the start. They ensured that we had taxing rights, but Africa didn't have taxing rights, which prevented their development. They ensured that we had taxing rights, but Latin America didn't have taxing rights, which stunted their development. It meant that our multinational companies became dominant in the global economy, promoting the interests of those companies, but not the rest of our companies. That situation is no longer tenable. China is now saying, the rules don't work for us, therefore we will create our own rules. Brazil's already doing that. India is already doing that. And we'll have no say in it. Because the organisation that sets the rules, based in Paris, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, no longer has the political power to impose its will over China and the rest of the world. And that means that tax havens like Jersey are no longer going to be protected by the interests of the United Kingdom and the rest of Europe. The game is essentially over. And as Prem said, I think the new rules which will emerge within the next few years will simply eliminate the opportunities for tax havens like Jersey to skim off the profits. And it doesn't just apply to corporates, it will also apply to the individuals who use places like Jersey and very wealthy people to avoid and evade paying taxes across the world. In other words, our business model is history, and we need urgently to move to the next, onto a new business model. So the rest of the world is no longer interested in the rules being set by the United Kingdom or the United States. Power has shifted, and I've watched it happening in the last few years, and the process is speeding up. As I said, last year, the United States completely isolated within this tax committee. The United Kingdom completely isolated. It has no friends whatsoever, and that's largely because of the arrogant way in which we have attempted to almost create a second empire through our tax havens. We are seen as the cause of the problem, not the solution. And I have to say I agree. But there's a real danger that if the situation continues to fragment and China adopts one set of rules and Brazil adopts another set of rules, then we'll have complete chaos within the globalized markets. So we need urgently to move forward. But we can no longer move forward on our terms. We're going to have to learn to accommodate the interests of countries outside Europe and North America. And I don't think our government's moved on sufficiently to and fully understands what this will require. But you will remember that in January, Prime Minister Cameron stood up in Switzerland at the World Economic Forum and said, the days of secrecy in the markets are over. We now need to recognise that the rules around corporate taxation are broke. Ordinary people in England are suffering as a result because corporations in England are paying next to no tax whatsoever, and the situation is deteriorating very fast. One thing which I think has helped us enormously has been young people and old people taking to the streets on this. The level of mobilisation, not just in Britain but elsewhere in Europe and in North America now and across the world, has been enormous. Last year, Starbucks was revealed to have paid no tax whatsoever in Britain. For 15 years it paid no tax whatsoever. It claimed that was because it made no profits in Britain, which makes it one of the most interesting charities in the world. And promptly took out his checkbook and said, we'll do a deal, we'll pay you 20 million and fix it there and then. But what that revealed was, first of all, that multinational companies are avoiding tax on a massive scale, and that's creating distorted markets, because whilst they're not paying tax, the corner shop cafes are. And Conservatives should be as concerned about this as any other. Any Conservative who claims they believe in markets should be agreeing with our position. And that's what Cameron stood up and said in Switzerland in January. And that's also why Osborne has committed G20 to tackling these issues. Because we now have an extraordinary situation where people on the left and the right are saying this situation is untenable. It cannot work. It's not serving anybody's interests apart from the interests of a very tiny minority of companies. The reason Prem and I suppose, are focusing on this is because this must be something of a wake-up call for Jersey. You might, well, our politicians over here have for years said, we're okay. From what I understand, they still seem, large by and large, to think that Jersey is insulated from the rest of the world. Believe you me, the rest of the world is moving on, and very, very fast indeed. The crisis has exposed the weak public finances across the world. The Western world no longer has the political strength to push its interests through either the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, or through the United Nations, or through any of the other rule-making bodies. China Brazil and other countries are now exerting their strength. And the tax haven model, by and large, is not in their interests. They might well have their own little tax havens anyway, but they do, in the case of China. This makes it all the more urgent that Jersey recognises the gravity of the situation. This island not only has an economic model which is failing, and failing fast, it also has a political model which is incapable of moving forward. The island suffers from what we call the finance curse. The finance curse is a bit like the resource curse that affects oil countries like Nigeria and Angola, where you have a single industry which dominates everything, which pulls all the political strings, which corrupts everything, and which undermines the interests of the vast majority of people who live there. The awful thing about an oil-rich country like Nigeria is that most Nigerians were far better off before they discovered oil in the 1970s. In real terms, they were much better off. And the country was much less corrupt than it is now. That's called the resource curse. If you look at Jersey, and you look at Cyprus, and you look at the City of London, they're all examples of what we call the finance curse, where you have a dominant industry which doesn't actually create any wealth. It simply extracts wealth from elsewhere, which pulls all the political strings, which crowds out all the other sectors, and prevents you from moving forward. Jersey suffers from the finance curse. It affects the economy. Politics of the island recognise that too much finance doesn't actually do the island any good at all. Listen to the theory, and they'd say, Jersey, with its weak regulation, low taxes, this should be the most enterprising place in the world, attracting lots of investment, lots of research and development and so on. Has it happened in the last 30 years? Not at all. I look around Jersey and I see no evidence of thriving, new, entrepreneurial, job-creating industry. Exactly the opposite. We're still working on the model of an industry that extracts wealth from other countries by poaching their tax base. But I think you've got a window of an absolute maximum of 10 years to move on. I think it's likely to be closer to 5 years. But it's a guess. But our politicians aren't even, and that's nothing. In terms of economic development, that's a blink of the eye. But by and large, our politicians, their dream is we revert to where we were, the happy days of the 1980s and 1990s. It ain't going to happen. So on that rather sobering note, never let it be said that an economist is a cheerful chap.
You need an accountant.
I'm sure that Prem and I would love to have a discussion with you. Your views are more important, but we always love to have questions and answers. And Pat's tapping her watch anyway, so let's have some Q&A, some questions.
Sorry,
yes.
Can I just...
Because governments in other places are witnessing erosion of their tax base, and they are going to respond, because governments, whether they are in Italy, France, Germany, UK, US, have a particular kind of social settlement with their own population, whether it's providing pensions, healthcare, education, transport, security. That social settlement is being undermined by the lack of tax revenues, and they're basically now going to be looking at how to address that. And I think the tax havens, Jersey is still a tax haven, despite signing FATCA and information exchange agreements with many other countries. The tax havens are going to be under deep, deep scrutiny. So if we look at the corporate tax system as we have now, it was basically introduced about 100 years ago, around about 1912. And there were a number of pillars to that system which are no longer sustainable. For example, one of the key ideas was that a company would pay tax in the country in which it is resident. Now that So if there was a group of companies that it had 1,000 subsidiaries, each of those 1,000 subsidiaries was supposedly taxable in their own right. And that meant that companies could play games with shifting profits to subsidiaries within. The left hand passes it to the right, and the right passes it to the left. There is no overall value added, but they could arbitrage against the tax system. That system is now no longer viable because companies are managing to avoid paying taxes in many countries. The second pillar of that was what we eventually called transfer pricing, that when companies engaged in intra-group transfers, that you could actually find some kind of a market price to say, look, this spark plug is going into making this car, this is the market price, and that is the cost we should be booking, because companies have been busy eliminating those markets. That's all been brought in rather than being out. So we have a situation today where 70% of the world global trade is dominated by about 500 corporations. There are 10 companies who control about 67% of the world's pharmaceuticals. 10 companies control about 60% of all the world's fertilizer. 10 companies control about all of the world's seeds. 3 companies control world's cocoa trade. These statistics tell us that there is no possibility whatsoever of getting independent market prices. So the two pillars of corporate finance, two key pillars, are no longer viable. They're totally broken. So a number of developments are likely to take place which would have severe consequences for Jersey. So one possibility of reform which is being talked about, and it's given a label of unitary taxation, maybe we'll talk a bit more about it later, is that we'll forget that a company consists of 100 or 1,000 subsidiaries. Why we will forget that is because these companies are under common control. They are essentially following a common strategy. So we will treat them as one unit. And we would say, we've got to work out your global profit. How we work that out, that's another issue. But we've got to work out their global profit, which means any intra-group transfers, any transactions routed through tax havens would be 100% nullified. They will have no impact because it's left hand passing to the right. There's no real value added. Okay? So then the global profit can be allocated to various states, various countries, according to a formula. The formula might take account of where the employees are. It might take account of where the assets are. It might take account of where the economic sacrifice for the sales or the value added takes place. So if I buy something in the UK by ordering on a website for Amazon, and the website is in Luxembourg, I'll write the check in the UK. Well, sorry, the value is not added in Luxembourg, but it is in the UK. Okay? So you could allocate, as it were, the profits, and then each country can tax it at any rate it wishes. Since tax havens neither have the real assets of the corporations, nor much of the sales, nor much of the employees, they won't be able to levy taxes. Even if they want to levy them at 0%, they will simply not have a share. That is one possibility. Another is you can work out the global profit. Countries can go alone, like the UK, US can go alone and say, okay, we're going to tax your worldwide income minus a credit for tax you might have paid in other countries. If you haven't paid tax in Cayman or Jersey, well, the credit for that is 0. In other words, the move is going to be to collect tax on the revenues which are avoiding tax at the moment. That is likely to happen within the next 5 to 10 years. So
there we are.
I think there would be a strong support for that kind of a move within the European Union, France, Germany in particular, strong support amongst developing countries, which will have real consequences. A good reason why Jersey should be thinking about the Plan B. And Jersey's approach at the moment is quite kind of relaxed. One approach is oh well, you can change anything you want in corporate taxation, it won't affect us because we manage the wealth of millionaires and rich individuals rather than corporations. Well, it's not beyond the wit of anybody to see that that is not going to be left alone either. There would be developments on that too. And one approach is, well, let us wait and see what happens. Well, I'm afraid it could be too late by the time Jersey acts. So the kind of developments on the horizon will have very serious consequences for tax havens. But I think within the next 5 to 10 years we would see their role in corporate taxation severely eroded. Maybe more. Before that? Sorry?
Not before that?
I think there will need to be various clarifications and agreements. For example, I said you need to may have to develop a formula to say how do you allocate global profits, say, of Microsoft to each country. Could be that some countries can easily agree on that, some won't. But we will have to wait and see. Okay? Some countries may well have divided loyalties. China, as a developing country, may welcome that kind of a model because it may collect more tax, but then Chinese companies are also investing overseas. They'll have to see which way that works out for them, because they can also, you know, the benefits they are getting by robbing, as it were, developing countries could be eroded. But under the current model, where you tax a company where it is resident rather than where it operates, that has deprived a lot of developing countries of revenues. Okay? Because companies could be digging for gold or diamonds in Tanzania, drilling for oil in Nigeria, and basically the companies which are controlling that are located in developed countries. So thereby a lot of tax revenues are being deprived. Developing countries are being deprived of tax revenues. So I think they would welcome the kind of change I outlined. I think these things would happen. John may have more to say on that. John.